Yo, what up? I'm Boss. Welcome to the video. Hey, before we jump into the conversation, hey, this is our kind of our first video. I wanted to set this up before we jumped in because a few things happened. When we did a recording, my face wasn't seen. And it's not about me, but you're going to hear my voice. You're not going to be able to see my face. But I also wanted to set up this video real quick. This was um, a panel discussion after a podcast, and this conversation is about being awake and aware to becoming more racially inclusive in our youth culture, in our spaces. What are some of the things that we can be doing, even minor adjustments that are possibly creating an exclusive space, and we want to rid ourselves of that to create more inclusivity. So here's the video. Jump in. Hope you enjoy it. Peace. We invited everybody here into a conversation to basically have a discussion about how we can change what's in our lane, what's in our control. And that's our youth spaces. That's our youth cultures. How do we become more inclusive? How do we become inclusive and become aware of things that have created exclusivity in terms of racial backgrounds, in terms of creating spaces where we go, I'm now aware as the leader that doing this or not doing this prevented people to walk into the door, or if that makes sense. I'm trying to frame it out really well, and I'm losing words right now. So I'm actually going to unmute people. And Thomas, I would love for you to speak into this, man, because you have been in youth ministry for a really long time, and we are so excited for you to be in here. And Donisha as well. I would love for y'all to talk about this as well, like what you've seen, and speak to this, help us learn, because maybe some experiences you've had even coming up through youth ministry where you've been like, this was really helpful, or this actually the leader didn't know and they did this. Because I want us all to grow and be better. And that's what we want to have in this conversation. So we're going to take a few minutes to do that. I don't really know how to start us off, but that's kind of the framework of this. Here's a question I have then. What is a practical thing that we can do right now that can change that? And I'm going to start like unmuting some people. And also, if you have questions, maybe there's something that came up from the time before in our conversation, drop them in the chat and we'll kind of field some of those and we'll go from there. So there's my question.
I'll jump in. First, I just want to say, Tommy, thank you for, I don't think I can even share and unpack the way that you just did. And I appreciate you and our friendship and brotherhood. And, what you said was just powerful in this conversation. What I'm going to say is a lot of what Tommy just said, that I just challenge everyone to take your journey. I do believe that, our white allies and other cultures need to have conversations with those that are people of color, but I also have to say, don't expect the people of color to do the work for you.
Yep.
That's good.
And
Yep.
Tommy has already articulated that in saying that you have to go on your own journey, especially those who work in predominantly white spaces. There's books where, on anti-racism that you can incorporate into your ministries, that you can start conversations, and speak to what Tommy said. That there are people. If we just look, and I'm not going to try to be long-winded. I just look at the fact that here in the DC area, it was a matter of people using their voice and power to say, we want to change the name of the Washington Redskins, a fight that's been going on for decades. But people made a decision that, we're in agreement that this is wrong. We're going to use our power and we're going to force this change to happen, when the owner said this is never going to happen. And I believe that's the same type of power that needs to evolve in the church, that when the church says we're going to use our power that we've historically been holding on to, and we're going to use it for the greater good, and we're going to align ourselves, like Tommy said, that we're just not going to, it's just not the white people or this culture that are going to be the ones that are dwelling in the riches of heaven, but we're going to look at our theology from the lens of those who live on the margins, and we're going to use our power so that we can all walk in a space of equity for the kingdom.
Right.
I'm gonna shut up because I could go on and on, but but thank you for the opportunity.
Yep, that's good.
Yeah, I think if I'm a youth pastor who has listened to the Free Refills podcast before, and I'm coming on and, you know, we talk about hard spaces, right? Like we talk about things that are sometimes uncomfortable, or probably most of the times we talk about the heart issues, you know, in this area, in this space. If I'm a youth pastor and I'm coming in and I go, man, I want to make sure, I'm asking myself that question. I want to make sure that I want to reach all students regardless of the way they look. Then what do I need to do to be aware, right? Like, yes, we talk about this journey, but like, if you could grab a youth pastor right now and be like, don't do this again when you have students come in, right? Like, what would that be? If you could shake a youth pastor and go, just don't do this, like just stop right there. That is something that, like, what would that be?
There's a concept in biblically, whenever you're teaching, to not always talk from the dominant voice or the dominant character, and start teaching the smaller characters, the minor roles instead of the major roles, and start, as you're reading and your interpretation and what you're looking for as far as your hermeneutic, to look from the minor character instead of the major character. And that alone will start to enhance your storytelling, because we understand that the Bible intrinsically is in a patriarchal society, and so women's roles are automatically minor as a woman speaking. So outside of Esther and, you know, like outside of those roles, then every other time women are in the text that they're in a minor role, that alone starts to breathe that out. Stretch that out and enlarge your conversation.
That's good.
And I think the same thing kind of goes even into the New Testament. Whenever you're talking about it, what does it look like? There's another concept that the entire Bible is a people who are in some type of oppression. They're going through different series of empire. And if you're talking about Egyptian or Assyrian or this Greco-Roman Empire, so you're talking about people who really are at the bottom. Spiritually, maybe not always, but they're at the bottom. And so again, you're talking from the margins. The Bible is really about a book of people who are from the margins. There's also like the difference between the suffering servant, right? And how much of when you're preaching, are you preaching from the suffering servant, or are you talking from this reigning king who comes back with all of this authority as Christ? And that's balance again from that. Are you talking about Jesus, the suffering servant? Or are you talking about, you know, this reigning Messiah? And that's still balance, right? He's with the people, he's amongst the people, he's giving his life for the people. He comes back with all of this power and authority. But before all of that, you know, what does that look like? So I think it has a lot to do with balance in your preaching and your teaching.
And Donisha, you mentioned in the comments at the very beginning, you talked about this idea of feedback loops help everybody. And I think a question that connects with what you just said is, who's in my feedback loop? Who's talking back to me? Is it only people that are in the majority, or do I have people that are in that forgotten margin to say, hey, you're only teaching from this perspective and you've got to listen to the other side too, because our feedback loops are only as effective of who's in that loop, right? So that for me, that's huge. That's challenging me of who I've got in my circle speaking into my life. So thank you.
And kind of going back to the Black Lives Matter conversation, or wherever people start, we know that we all aren't starting on the same page. And even whenever you're asking an African American, or not just with Black Lives Matter, if it's a Latinx person, you're asking them to kind of start and talk about their experience and what that looks like. Sometimes what I've noticed a lot, that people want to start right now at 2020, like there's not a historical narrative that leads us to this point. And so when you want, and they kind of want to say, well, you can't really say that there's no progress that has been made. But then people are saying like, okay, but if 400 years gets us to this point, are we willing to take another 400 years to get us to some, you know what I'm saying? And so for certain people, it's that push and pull of how much, how fast. And, you know, everyone, we may not agree on speed or on how fast, on how quickly the changes take place, on what types of changes need to take place. And so I think sometimes with that, you know, it can just kind of cause some type of conflict, because if you're talking about redlining and GI bills and someone's actually talking about a historical narrative of generational wealth versus someone who's talking about 2020, you're starting from two different places in the conversation. And it does take, you know, including the historical narrative for you to both be on the same page, or at least say, okay, are we saying 1990? Are we saying 1985? Are we saying 1960? Are we saying Reconstruction? Because it, you know, the conversation changes with that information.
Great.
I think it's really good. I want to bring in Brett. Brett just kind of put in the comments, you know, Thomas brought up a great point just about kind of a warning to those who want to just want to stand up. And Brett followed with, you know, just saying that he's hearing from youth pastors as well, that they are youth pastors that have desires to help teenagers who are in these hard conversations, but are getting pushback from leaderships or maybe even parents. What would you just say to like a youth pastor in that space? Obviously, yes, Thomas, you know, you just gave us a warning, you know, hey, just letting you know, I appreciate Donisha saw some of the stuff that I've said, and Donisha's like, hey, just want to let you know. And I'm like, I don't care. And so I told my wife, I said, I'm posting this, so you better be all right. What would you say to those youth pastors as far as what does that line look like, right? Like, how can they still be in it with them, even if maybe not the entire leadership? Like, there are people like me who say, like, I want to be in this. I understand I'm going to get pushback. What would you say to them? Maybe an encouragement, maybe more warning, maybe more clarity for those people. I mean, I'm listening.
I mean, I think there's levels to this, right? You have to know where you're serving and who you're serving, and you're evaluating your own situation. To be honest, I could be really upset about the guys who aren't saying anything right now, but if they're navigating a church where if they were to say something, they're getting fired and they have a family and kids, like, I don't know what that pressure is. I'm not married and I don't have these kids. I know that for the cause of Christ, it will cost us something, but that's his walk and that's his responsibility or her responsibility with their family and those responsibilities. And so I'm not going to cast some type of judgment about that. Now, I may say some things in private, you know, but not on social media. And I think that's what Tommy's saying. There's a lot of this stuff that's happening in social media where we haven't even earned the right to be heard. We may not even have the level of relationship to really speak into someone's life, and we're being super judgmental in the middle of cancel culture. Like, that's the other thing. You know, I'm, you know, it's bad if I say something, it's bad if I don't say something, and just trying to figure out that whole dynamic. But with the students and their parents in churches, because we're seeing that even here in Carmel, where kids are on one side of this conversation and parents and grandparents are on another side, there's a place in that moment to talk about honoring, right? We honor our elders, and we, you know, and reinforce that about leadership, about tradition and why traditions matter, but then also the difference in the historical narrative as to why. And you talk to the parents on the same end. You're talking about the most diverse generation that's ever lived. Of course, they're not going to come to this conversation the same place you will. And you have a responsibility as a church to talk about the flourishing of all members, young and old. And so it's, again, informing everyone in that conversation. It's not just to the students. There is balance on the other side to the adults.
I would also say to Bill's comment on the side, I absolutely believe that where the issue is the family. But here's why I would say that's why that's why it's so important for the church leadership to listen to the youth pastor, to go, okay, look, like this is what is going on. We have to re-look at some of these things, reframe it, because it's not just a youth issue. It's the whole family. It's a church issue. So, but yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I love everything you guys are saying, man. I don't even know I'm on here. So
No, Tommy, I think it's also, Tommy, I'll piggyback off that. I really like, you say that. And, I've met in youth ministry, and I'm sure other people in youth ministry have heard this statement. Parents get involved in church because why? They want their kids in church. They might not want to be in church, but they'll go because their kids want to be in church. And I can't tell you how many times you all have probably heard this, of like the parents going, hey, we actually became members of the church because our kids basically witnessed to us. So I think it is why we can say a family issue. These youth pastors being able to step into these hard conversations because maybe their parents aren't, like, then brings that family back together to go, man, maybe we really can find healing there. And just to say thank you to every youth pastor that, that's out there, like, that's doing that. It's not easy. So I thank you, Tommy, for saying that too.
Thomas, you were going to add something at some point.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Donisha said, because she said something really key. Because from my context, I go into every youth pastor assignment I've been hired at knowing that I'm probably going to get fired.
Absolutely.
But I say that from a context of being single, not having kids, and I just, and being a bivocational youth pastor in an urban community. And, I thank God that, my church gives me the money that they give me. But I think because it's not maybe the amount of money that others get in their context, that I can afford to, kind of push leadership a little bit more. And when I share this warning, I share the warning in a way not to discourage people from pushing, but I think there has to be constructive conversations that you have with your leadership of how can we do this in a way that's going to be productive. But I have to also realize, and my context looks a lot different, but what's problematic that a lot of these contexts that maybe some of these leaders are in, it's based on, if I press this issue, if we have this conversation, it's going to affect the money that comes in to the church. And we don't want to have conversations that affect the money that come in, because if I rub the person that's given 2 to 3 million to the church the wrong way, how are we going to operate tomorrow? And see, that's problematic. Because now we are basing these conversations around money and not spiritual issues that are important globally. But it's a very touchy subject. It's probably a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole series, bro. Like, but I would say too, what John Butler brought up as well. That's one of the reasons why I talk about power structure, and it's not just in the white church. I talk a lot about the white church because of power structures within a larger national narrative.
Right.
But I run across the same power structure. What Thomas is talking about isn't only in white churches. Oh my gosh, are you talking about like the theological lens that a lot of churches, top-down churches, I've worked with Korean and Korean American churches. You talk about top-down structure. Oh my gosh, like I'm over 40 and I wouldn't be allowed to talk in a meeting because I'm not an elder, right? I mean, there's just that kind of, but so you have a lot of that kind of stuff. But again, you have to be able to address the structure, because if the same thing keeps on happening over and over again, you just got to go, okay, I think there's a problem here. Maybe it's not an individual problem. They maybe made an individual choice, but there's a structure here, a process that's happening that we have to address. And so I agree with John as he talks about, others also coming to a biblical perspective. And and a lot of that I can talk about in an evangelical structure as well. But again, even outside of that, there's power structures. And that's all I'm saying is I'm saying we have to be critical of some of those things. And we have to not be how young Tommy was, where I was like, Rage Against the Machine, let's burn it all down. In my wisdom, you grow to a place where you go, you don't split. Where in psychology, there's this idea of splitting, where it's either all good or all bad. We have to be mature enough as Christians to live in that tension and go, you know what? This wasn't good about this, but this was. Let's hold on to that tradition, or let's hold on to that piece of it. Let's bring it in, but let's be critical about the things that aren't good. And I think this generation that's coming up is exposing a lot of that, while at the same time they're buying into complete crap as well. Like stuff that's like really, you're all about authenticity. Have you seen IG? There's a lot that's not authentic. Like, what are you talking about, dude? Like you're the way you pose yourself, you look 30 pounds lighter than you are. You know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of stuff like that, right? So anyway, that I would say that. So I hear that from what John's saying. So it's complex, friends. It's hard.
Yeah, it is complex. And I mean, I guess we only know we only know to just talk and help us understand how to unpack that and see how complex it is. And so I appreciate this time that Mike and Tommy, you came and you sat in the room and we had this conversation. Thank you. Thank you for this. I really hope and pray that it was helpful for everyone who's in the room. Maybe there's some stuff that you're like, well, dang, I didn't even know I needed to think about that. Now I need to think about that. And it's pushing us into places where we're learning, and it's shaping us to be better. I really, really appreciate it. Tommy, how can people, maybe they heard something that you said and they want to reach out to you? Hopefully it's not hate mail. It is. Tell me about it and I'll go after them.
No, that's good. Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on, if you're on socials, it's Tommy UYWI. It's both on Facebook and Instagram as well. You can, hit me up in those places. That would be the best. Keep you out of my email box, but you can find that too at UYWI.org. But you can check that out. Yes. We've done a ton of work in this space. We also just before this, I did another episode of The Future is Here, and it's all about this. It's about reimagining the church that we're all leading right now. And so if you want to hear more about that, that's good. And so, we'd love for you to follow us and check that out. And hopefully that's helpful.
That's awesome. I've loved it being like taking the posture that Mike DeVito has taught me to take, which is I just want to listen and I just want to be in the room and hang out with y'all and just be in that space and learn. And I've thoroughly enjoyed and just learned a lot by joining in on the calls, listening to the podcast. So I appreciate that. And Mike, how can people reach out to you? How can they connect to you?
Oh, I'm not that sophisticated like Tommy. Just, hey, NYM, whatever. But hey, I want to give a shout out to just the podcast. I mean, the Zoom calls that they're doing every Thursday at 4:00 Pacific Standard Time. Those are great. But also, Tommy just passed the torch on to another ministry yesterday, Manhood Camp. One of the best things I've ever experienced, being in the back of the room, seeing 500 young men who most don't have dads, just crazy good, and teaching them how to change a tire. I know it's going to be different virtually, but I just want to give a shout out to that ministry. Tommy, I can't remember what Jose's ministry is right now, but Manhood Camp, what's the date on that again?
August 1st, it'll be online. It's Rescue a Generation. Yeah.
So anyway,
cool.
I'm speaking to my buddies here, the National Network. We've got to embrace what's happening and connect with whatever's going on that way within our communities. And what's a great place to start with these young men. So
Yeah, that's a good word. Thank you for that. That's super cool. Hey, for everybody that's on the call, thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of this. We're going to do more of these. And we finally get to see Brett's face. Here he is. He finally took it off. But yeah, be looking out for different stuff like this. Like, we're going to put this thing up on YouTube, and we're going to, all that sort of stuff. So thanks. And we'll catch all of you later. Peace out. See y'all later.
Thank you. See you, Tommy.
Later, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Tommy.
Yeah, bro.
Blessings.